Just simply doesn't make sense. Fast X was reportedly barely profitable, grossing $714 million on a $340 million budget. But the reason that doesn't make sense is because a lot of people don't truly understand how box office numbers work. So here's the breakdown from Box Office Mojo of what Fast X made at the box office. $145 million from here in America and $558 million from overseas. But just because the movie grossed that much money, that doesn't mean Universal Pictures, who made the movie, is going to get that much money from the box office, because in America, about 60% of the money from the ticket sales goes back to the studio, whereas overseas, about 20 to 40% go back to the studio. So in most cases, for easy math, you can just say that about 50% of the worldwide gross is going to actually go back to the studio, but Fast X is kind of an edge case because internationally they are so popular, the Fast and Furious movies, that they make most of their money from overseas, which means the movie studio, Universal Pictures, is making even less than normal. And the $340 million budget is just accounting for the production budget. Marketing is a whole other thing. Because as this article says from Investopedia, marketing expenses are not included in the average movie budget estimate, and you have to add another 50% of the production costs on average on top of the production budget. So $340 million production budget for Fast X, you're going to be adding at least another $170 million for marketing. So let's look at Barbie for another example. It's grossed $1.2 billion worldwide so far, so that means Warner Brothers, the studio behind it, has brought in about $600 million from Barbie. Now, the budget for Barbie production-wise was $145 million, so then about half of that you have to add on top of it to account for marketing. But Barbie clearly was more aggressive in its marketing than most movies, so you could probably add another $100 million or so, maybe $150 million on top of that for the marketing budget. So we'll just say Barbie all in all cost about $250 million. Going back to the box office number, you see Barbie made $1.2 billion at the box office, but actually they're only getting $600 million of that back at Warner Brothers, accounting for about $250 million budget. Barbie's profit is about $350 million right now, which is still a ton. But when you see that $1.2 billion number, it's really not even close to that in terms of the profit the studio is actually seeing. So now that we know this, $704 million means about $350 million are going to be going back to Universal Pictures Studios. And we know minimum you're going to have to add about 50% of that $350 million budget back on top of it. So we're going to say that Fast X cost at least $500 million. So all that being said, this report from Variety is wrong. Fast X was not barely profitable. They absolutely guaranteed lost money on this movie. I feel like it's a little wonky for Fast X because it's a two-part final part to the Fast and Furious franchise. Some of the budget used already is going to be used in the final part as well. Then we could open up the whole other can of worms of Hollywood accounting, how even when they make record profits off a movie, they fluff the numbers to make it look like they didn't actually make that much, so they don't have to pay out taxes and royalties to the people that properly are deserving them, which is one of the reasons the WGA and SAG are still on strike against the AMPTP.